21 animal attacks, 7 levels. I've gone through hours of footage to compile the most disturbing animal attacks ever caught on camera. We'll start with some gruesome encounters and go deeper into incidents so horrifying you'll second guess that desire to pet. Level 1. Mistaken Identity. A cyclist was riding in the 2022 Rock Colber race when he spotted something like a cow blocking the trail. But just as he got within 10 to 15 yards of the animal, it suddenly turned around. And that's when he realized it wasn't a cow, it was a bull. And it was now charging straight at him. Now, before the cyclist could react, the bull slammed into the rider, knocking him off his bike. He tried to get back up, but before he could stand, the bull circled back around and got its head under his chest. And this launched him into the air a second time before he slammed back down, barely able to move. Weirdly enough, this particular bull had already been moved away by farmers earlier that day, yet somehow it returned to the exact canyon section where riders were passing. Later, the cyclist was identified as Tony Inderbitson, who said he genuinely thought it was just another cow since they were common along the route. Now, that same bull had later gone after 3 other riders in the same narrow section. 2 of those attacked still managed to finish the race, but the first cyclist couldn't. Now, fortunately, he didn't break any bones, and none of the other riders suffered serious injuries either. Meanwhile, the race organizer said they considered changing the route for next time. Behind the glass. The MGM Grand in Las Vegas had a lion habitat where tourists could watch handlers work with big cats up close. But on September 1st, 2010, that show went horribly wrong. 2 handlers were inside the 1.5-inch thick soundproof glass enclosure with the lions during a public interaction. But in the blink of an eye, the male lion suddenly lunged at one of the staff. He aggressively bit down on his leg and pinned him to the floor. The handler kept struggling as the 400-pound lion refused to let go. The other trainer rushed in with a rod attempting to distract the male lion, but nothing worked. Before the situation could escalate further, the lioness nearby did something unexpected. She blocked the male lion and nipped at him. That split-second distraction gave the handler enough time to scramble out of the enclosure. Now, it was later reported that he sustained only minor injuries, which is lucky considering what could have happened. Meanwhile, footage of the incident went viral. The lion handler overseeing the exhibit was fired for multiple workplace safety violations, while MGM Grand announced the habitat would be closed permanently in January 2012 as part of a $160 million renovation. In the end, the 20 rotating lions returned to Evans' 8.5-acre ranch outside Las Vegas, ending the display for good. 6-second attack. On May 26, 2025, at Sriracha Zoo in Thailand, a tourist was walking a full-grown tiger through the mini Tigertopia Zoo. A guide walked alongside them during the session, overseeing the experience. But midway through the walk, the tourist bent down to take a photo. The guide began poking the tiger with a stick, attempting to position it for the shot. But that only agitated the animal, and the next moment, it pinned the tourist to the ground. It then lunged at his legs, forcing the guide to rush in to separate them. The mini Tigertopia experience had been a standard offering at the zoo. Tourists paid to walk leashed adult tigers through the zone for photos and videos. And on that day, 3 Indian visitors were present, but only 1 joined the session. Meanwhile, the full footage leaked online and quickly went viral. It sparked global outrage about the dangers of treating wild animals like Instagram props. The backlash finally forced Thai authorities to take action. 7 days later, the Department of National Parks ordered the permanent closure of the tiger walking service. The tourists had ultimately survived, but the incident proved that a leash and a cane can't make a predator a pet. Level 2. The Death Roll. A feeding demonstration for a kid's birthday party at a reptile zoo went horribly wrong. The footage shows the trainer approaching an 8-foot alligator to feed it in front of the crowd. But instead of taking the food, the animal suddenly chomped down on her hand. The very next moment, it literally pulled her into the deep water. And the attack didn't stop there, because the alligator then began death rolling. It spun continuously with the trainer's hands still trapped in its jaws. Seeing that the situation was getting deadly, a man in the crowd jumped into the enclosure and climbed onto the alligator's back. He used his full body weight to pin the animal down, but still, the animal refused to let go. This prompted another visitor to help from the sidelines. The group managed to free the woman's hand from the jaws, but now the hero was left alone on top of the thrashing reptile. He had to wait for a calm moment to escape the enclosure before the alligator could bite him too. The incident happened in August 2021 at Scales and Tails, Utah, a reptile center. The trainer was identified as Lindsay Bull, and the alligator as an 8-foot male named Darth Gator. Doctors confirmed that Lindsay suffered multiple fractures, a broken thumb, and a damaged tendon in her hand. She eventually had to undergo surgery to repair the damage caused by the alligator's bite. As for the brave guest, he was identified as Donnie Wiseman. He was visiting the reptile center to celebrate a family friend's 5th birthday party. The park subsequently updated its safety rules to ensure 2 staff members are always present for every feeding. Meanwhile, Lindsay eventually returned to her job and even posted a video of herself feeding the same alligator months later. But this entire story had a surprise twist. During a later interview, Lindsay revealed that she wasn't actually dragged into the water against her will, as had been speculated. Instead, she chose to leap into the enclosure as soon as the bite happened. She knew that pulling away would cause the alligator to rip her arm off, so she used her gymnastics background to roll with the animal. Dragged across pavement. On December 8, 2025, a routine walk to school suddenly became a fight for survival. Surveillance footage shows a mother walking her son toward the entrance when a dark animal sprints from a nearby yard. The large black dog lunges at them without any warning. In a blink, it knocks both of them to the hard concrete. The mother quickly pins her son to the sidewalk to shield him with her own body, and this move saves the boy, but leaves the mother completely exposed. The animal latches its teeth onto her ankle and begins to pull, and it drags her several feet across the parking lot while she screams for help. Now, eventually, the dog's owner rushes over and tries to help, but the animal is so aggressive that it bites her hand as well. The struggle lasted for nearly a full minute before the woman could get the dog to release its grip. Now, this terrifying scene took place right outside Whiteford Elementary School during the morning drop-off. Police identified the mother as Reem Kashen, who was taken to the hospital with severe bite wounds to her foot and ankle. The school district initially described the event as a simple medical situation. However, parents who saw the video were outraged by the lack of clear details. They demanded to know why a dangerous animal was allowed so close to school. As a result of the public pressure, an investigation into the dog's history began. Authorities discovered the dog had escaped from an unfenced yard nearby. And even worse, it had not been vaccinated against rabies. As a result, the county animal control determined the dog was too much of a safety risk to stay in the neighborhood. Therefore, the owner was asked to surrender the animal to Lucas County Canine Care and Control. Beyond that, the owner was charged with having a vicious dog and failing to vaccinate his pets. Hand through the cage. 15 tourists were watching the lion enclosure at Jamaica Zoo on May 20th, 2022, when a zoo attendant tried to give them something extra to film. He reached his hand through the chain link fence to touch a huge male lion. However, the predator was not in the mood for a performance. It let out several loud roars and showed its teeth to warn the man, but he didn't listen to the warning. Instead, he reached even deeper into the cage to show off for the crowd. Then, in the next moment, the lion suddenly clamped its jaws onto his right hand. The attendant began to scream and wrestle to get his hand back. Still, the lion refused to let go, and that's when the video cut out. But witness interviews later revealed that the tourists initially thought it was a prank. They actually laughed while the man fought for his life, but when he finally managed to pull his hands off the animal, they realized it wasn't a joke. His entire finger had been bitten off. One witness even ran away because they were scared of the blood. This graphic video soon went viral worldwide. It turned out the man was a contractor at the facility. He was trying to show off for the guests as the tour was ending, but this overconfidence cost him a part of his body forever. The zoo owners later claimed this behavior went against their rules. However, old reports showed a different story. Turns out, the staff used to brag about these close encounters. They promised visitors they could get close enough to watch the lions growl, which created this dangerous culture. As a result, the National Environment and Planning Agency launched a full investigation. They found that the zoo had many safety problems beyond this one. For example, they did not have an attractions license, which they should have had to operate. Furthermore, the staff was not properly trained to handle dangerous predators. Ultimately, the agency ordered the zoo to shut down until it could rectify all the issues. As for the guide, he eventually recovered from the bite, but his finger was gone forever. 3 against 1. It was a quiet winter bike ride when a mountain biker suddenly found himself fighting for his life. The footage from his helmet camera captures the moment 3 dogs swarmed him without warning. They lunged at him repeatedly, snapping and biting as he struggled to keep them away. He immediately grabbed his bicycle and used it as a shield while shouting for help. The dogs kept coming, forcing him to hold the bike between himself and the pack as they continued their attack. Moments later, 2 people emerged from the brush and screamed at the dogs to stop. The confrontation lasted for several intense minutes until they finally managed to restrain the pack. Investigations into the footage later identified the victim as Grumpy MTB, a mountain biker. It turned out that the animals were juvenile Belgian Malinois. This breed is famous for having a very high hunting drive, and these specific dogs were being fostered by a local couple for a charity. The couple had let the dogs off their leashes because they did not expect anyone else to be on the trail that day. Now, the biker eventually went to the doctor to treat several puncture wounds and scratches, and he later explained that running would have been fatal. The dogs were fast enough to catch him, which could have left him alone against all 3. Luckily, his thick riding gear saved him from much worse injuries, but his bike wasn't as lucky as it was badly damaged from the attack. The foster owners felt terrible and compensated him around 200 pounds. Now, ultimately, he chose not to pursue legal action, viewing it as an honest mistake by inexperienced carers. As for the dogs, the charity reclaimed all 3 of them for behavioral assessment. They were eventually rehomed to owners who could provide proper training and are all doing well now. Now, the cases so far were disturbing, but in the next levels, survival isn't guaranteed. So subscribe and keep going. Level 3. When Hunger Struck. The Black Bear Show at Hangzhou Safari Park was in full swing when one of the animals went off script. It happened on December 6, 2025, around 3:50 p.m. in Zhejiang Province, China. 2 black bears were on stage doing their usual tricks for the cheering crowd. However, the energy quickly shifted as one of the bears suddenly lunged at his trainer. The predator pinned the man to the floor while clawing at his chest and pulling at his clothing. Other staff members saw the danger and rushed onto the stage with long metal poles. They began hitting the ground and using performance props to distract the angry animal. Still, it refused to move. Now, eventually, the team managed to shove a large board between the two, which allowed the keeper to scramble away. The bear was then restrained and led off stage as the entire area was sealed off for safety. Now, after the footage went viral, the Hangzhou Safari Park issued an official apology to Weibo. Beyond that, they announced that the bear, known as Zhang Er, would no longer participate in future shows. He would be moved to a larger feeding area in the mountains for better welfare. As for the trainer, he suffered minor injuries, but nothing life-threatening. In a video posted after the incident, he explained that Zhang Er hadn't intended to harm him. He had been carrying a bag of carrots and apples, which overstimulated the animal's natural instincts. The Human Wall. July 13th, 2013 in Pamplona, Spain. Hundreds of runners in white and red sprinted through a narrow tunnel toward the bullring entrance. However, the crowd suddenly stopped moving at the very entrance of the stadium. This caused the runners in front to trip and fall, yet the people behind them could not stop their momentum. Thus, a massive human pileup formed. Dozens of people were crushed at the bottom of the stack while others scrambled over them to find air. And just when you think the situation can't get any worse, 6 enormous bulls charged into the tunnel at full speed. They plowed directly into the wall of people, goring and stomping anyone in their path as people screamed and struggled to escape. The audience above the bullring entrance watched in horror. Some yelled warnings while others reached down trying to pull people up, but the chaos continued for several agonizing minutes. Eventually, authorities rushed in and began pulling victims out one by one. However, the bulls were still charging, so the rescuers had to work around the animals. Eventually, they managed to divert the herd into a side alley. Now, this nightmare happened at the 7th bull run of the San Fermin Festival. It's an event where 6 bulls and steers charge 850 meters through Pamplona's streets toward the Plaza del Toros building. Hundreds of runners dash ahead for the thrill, but this time, the sheer number of runners trying to enter the ring at the same time forced shut a door that was usually left open. This small error blocked the path, forcing the crowd to bottleneck at the most dangerous spot possible. As a result, over 20 people were injured and had to be hospitalized. One of them required mechanical ventilation in intensive care with a reserved prognosis. 2 others were gored by the bulls in the buttocks and armpits, respectively, and beyond that, many others suffered from broken bones and shock after being stepped on by the heavy herd. They were all eventually discharged, but the incident became one of the most haunting pileups in the festival's history. 5 floors down. In Cucuta, Colombia, security cameras at a residential complex captured a desperate fight for survival. The metal doors on the 5th floor slid open to reveal a woman crawling on her hands and knees. A large black dog was attached to her arm and refused to let go. She dragged herself into the cramped space, yet the animal followed her and continued to rip at her skin. After a few seconds of struggle, the woman used her free hand to frantically smash the lobby button. Meanwhile, the dog began to shake its head with incredible force to tear her muscle and bone. She writhed on the floor in agony while blood pooled around her feet and legs. The elevator then began its slow descent, leaving her with no way to escape the attack. She kicked at the dog's face, but the animal was too strong and focused on its target. Ultimately, the elevator reached the 1st floor and the doors finally opened. Security guards and family members were waiting in the lobby and rushed forward to save her. They managed to pull the dog away and carry the woman to safety while she was slipping in and out of consciousness. Now, this footage later went viral and sparked a massive investigation. It turned out the attack started inside a shared apartment in the Prados del Este neighborhood. The victim was a 25-year-old woman who lived there with 3 other people. She had just walked into her bedroom to tie her shoelaces when the 4-year-old pit bull suddenly lunged. Now, the dog did not belong to her, but it was owned by one of her housemates. It had never acted like this before, so the woman had no reason to be afraid. However, the animal latched onto her arm the moment she leaned down. She realized she would die if she stayed in the bedroom, so she crawled into the hallway while screaming for help. She reached the elevator in a final attempt to find someone who could stop the mauling. Doctors at Erasmus University Hospital confirmed she had severe bites in her neck and legs. Furthermore, she suffered broken bones in both of her hands from trying to pry the dog's jaws open. Later, investigators found the pit bull was not wearing a muzzle, violating local safety laws governing dangerous breeds in public buildings. Therefore, the authorities seized the animal for a 10-day behavioral analysis. Ultimately, the woman survived the nightmare, but she now faces a very long road to physical and emotional recovery. Not a statue. A video from Cabug Island Mangrove and Wetlands Park in the Philippines captured something that left viewers horrified. The footage shows a man trapped in shallow water with a massive 15-foot saltwater crocodile. The crocodile had already clamped her jaws around his right arm, and she wasn't letting go. She bit into his thigh as well, which caused the man to grimace and wail in agony. The crocodile then began thrashing violently, performing a death roll while dragging and twisting his body through the water. He remained trapped, unable to free himself as the attack continued, and onlookers screamed in panic from outside the fence, but there was nothing they could do to help him. The mauling went on for roughly 30 minutes, with the man still inside. A caretaker eventually decided to enter the pen himself. He grabbed a piece of cement and struck the crocodile repeatedly on the head, forcing her jaws open just enough for the man to break free. Medics then rushed in and wrapped his heavily bleeding arm and thigh with cloth before transporting him to the hospital. But how did he end up inside the enclosure in the first place? Now, it turned out the man had been visiting the park on April 28, 2025 with a friend, and as they walked around the attraction, they saw the large female crocodile named Lele resting motionless in her fenced pen. The man mistook the still crocodile for a plastic statue, so he told his friend he was going inside. Footage from before the attack shows him standing outside the enclosure saying, "I'm scared," yet he climbed over the chain-link fence anyway and waded into the water. Onlookers and zookeepers shouted warnings to stop him, but the breach happened too quickly. By the time anyone could react, Lele had already attacked. The man was rushed to a nearby hospital where doctors worked to save his limbs. He survived the attack, but he required more than 50 stitches to close the deep holes in his skin. He was later identified as Eric Saladaga Vista, a 29-year-old mentally impaired animal lover. In a hospital interview, Vista said he had entered out of curiosity because he wanted to talk to the crocodile. Police later warned that Eric's curiosity put many other people's lives at risk, and the park had to review all of its safety rules to ensure no one else could climb into the pens. Henry's Pond. On February 20th, 2023, an elderly woman was enjoying a quiet walk with her small dog on a sunny Florida afternoon when tragedy struck. The pair strolled along the grassy edge of a pond directly behind her house. She had no idea that a massive alligator was swimming from the far side of the pond toward the shore. She was completely unaware of the ripple in the water behind her. Suddenly, the reptile lunged out of the pond with explosive speed. It knocked her to the ground and clamped its jaws onto her leg. Within seconds, the alligator dragged her underwater and out of sight. Neighbors heard the commotion and rushed to the edge of the pond to help. However, the water had already gone still. They called for emergency help while the small dog sat alone on the bank. First responders arrived and used a helicopter to search the murky water from above, and they eventually spotted a large shadow resting on the bottom of the pond. Divers went into the water and recovered the woman's body. Now, shortly after, a professional trapper arrived to remove the dangerous animal. It weighed between 600 and 700 pounds and fought aggressively during removal. Once they hauled it out, they taped its mouth shut before putting it down under Florida Fish and Wildlife protocols. Later, investigations identified the victim as 85-year-old Gloria Sergey. She lived in a retirement community called Spanish Lakes Fairways in Fort Pierce, and it turned out that residents had nicknamed the massive gator Henry and were well aware it frequented the pond. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission confirmed the alligator weighed near 700 pounds, and they determined that the animal was likely hunting the dog before it grabbed Gloria instead. Nearly 1 year later, Gloria's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the property management company. The lawsuit alleged that Spanish Lakes Fairway knew that dangerous alligators lived in the pond, yet failed to install warnings or barriers or to request their removal. They also claimed the community had even forced residents to walk their dogs near the hazardous water. In response, the community president released a statement, but the legal battle over the pond still continues today. Fatal crossing. A carnival horse race in Acracia, Peru was in full swing when a man suddenly stumbled onto the track. The crowd had gathered close to the unfenced dirt road to watch the traditional Morochurros race during the Carnaval Tipaki Festival on February 12, 2024. Two riders were charging at full gallop in the final stretch. And at that same moment, the man tried to cross the path directly in front of them. But he didn't make it, as one of the horses struck him head-on at full speed, which sent him crashing to the ground. Blood became visible as he lay motionless on the track, and this forced the race to end immediately. Nearby health workers scrambled to reach the fallen man, and an ambulance arrived within minutes. At the hospital, the doctors discovered he'd sustained severe facial trauma and a traumatic brain injury from the impact. And despite their efforts, he lost his life while undergoing care. The victim was later identified as 31-year-old Peter Barrientos Salazar from the district of San Pedro de Corres in Churcampa province. Multiple witnesses reported that he appeared to be intoxicated when he entered the track. Ultimately, his sister traveled to the hospital to identify his body, which was then transferred to the morgue. Level 4. Protecting his mother. Neighbors in Stonewall heard screaming coming from a garden on Main Street. But by the time anyone could react, the incident had already turned deadly. The footage shows two pit bulls viciously attacking a man in broad daylight, while several people attempt to tear the dogs away. Another man can be heard calling 911, reporting that the situation was very severe. The attack continued for more than a minute, leaving the victim mauled on the ground. This incident occurred on September 14, 2023, in the quiet village of Stonewall, England. It turned out the two dogs had escaped from a neighbor's property by jumping through a window. They then entered the garden where an elderly woman was standing, and that was when the woman's son, identified as Ian Price, came outside to usher the loose dogs back to their address. They initially appeared playful, however, in the next moment, they turned vicious and set upon him. Emergency services were called immediately. They administered advanced life support and trauma care, but Ian had sustained multiple life-threatening injuries, so he had to be rushed to the hospital. And sadly, he lost his life a few hours later. Later, the police launched a full investigation involving CCTV footage and witness statements. The investigation revealed that the dogs were American XL bullies that belonged to a 33-year-old neighbor, James Trimble Petite. He had been warned many times about the dogs escaping, but he never secured his windows. Furthermore, the animals were kept in a tiny flat with no toys, blankets, or exercise, and this neglect, combined with their size, made them a ticking time bomb for the community. The owner eventually pleaded guilty to being in charge of dogs that caused a death. Consequently, a judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison for his role in the tragedy. Wrong opponent. The cockfighting arena in Paramonga, Peru was packed with spectators on October 15, 2025. But nobody expected the violence to turn on one of the handlers. An experienced gallero was attaching a metal navaja spur to a rooster inside the cockpit. However, as he finished strapping them on and released the bird into the arena, it didn't attack the opponent waiting across the ring. Instead, the rooster spun around and lunged at him, striking directly into his right thigh with the blade. The man remained on his feet for a few seconds while the crowd watched in silence. However, a massive amount of blood began to pour from the wound, and he collapsed. The arena had charged admission for this dangerous event, yet there was no first aid kit or medical staff. Nobody even tried to press down on the wound to stop the bleeding. Instead, friends loaded his limp body onto a motorcycle and rushed him to a nearby clinic. He arrived conscious but extremely weak from the blood loss. Meanwhile, his daughter got the call and raced to the facility, but by the time she walked in, her father was already unconscious on a stretcher. 5 minutes later, the doctors pronounced him dead. He had simply run out of blood to pump through his veins. And later, the man was identified as 55-year-old Jorge Luis Castillo Corzo. It turned out he was a very famous bird breeder and trainer in the town of Paramonga. On this day, he was not even competing in the actual fight. He was only helping a friend attach the blades when the bird went rogue. A forensics doctor later confirmed that a simple bandage or hand pressure could have saved the man's life. Jorge's family is now demanding that the local government take responsibility for the tragedy. They want the city to stop insuring licenses to arenas without doctors on site. This incident has sparked a nationwide debate about the hidden dangers of the sport. Bite from the beyond. In March 2023, Santa Maria, Philippines, shows a man holding the severed head of a king cobra. He smiled for the onlookers and purposefully placed his hand in the open mouth of the dead reptile. And just then, a natural reflex caused the cobra's jaw muscles to clamp down tight on his skin. The fangs sank deep into his hand and injected a massive amount of liquid venom. The man tried to shake the head off, but the damage was already done. Within seconds, his skin began to change to a dark, bruised color, and the neurotoxins were moving through his blood at a terrifying speed. He suddenly lost his balance and fell to the dirt right in front of the witnesses. People rushed toward him to help, but his body was already shutting down from the poison, and he lost his life in the middle of the street before anyone could even call a doctor. The incident had started earlier that day when residents in Santa Maria encountered and took down the large king cobra. The man then took the severed head to show everyone that the snake was harmless once dead, but that assumption cost him his life. After the incident, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources issued a public statement urging people to avoid handling venomous reptiles even after death. The victim was later identified as 42-year-old Renante Maligon, a local resident who died as a direct result of his own actions that day. The second victim. This footage from Indonesia went viral within hours, but not for the reason anyone expected. It shows a man wading into the Muara Jawa River while performing what appears to be a ritual. Onlookers watched from the riverbank as he swam further out, still reciting his incantations, but moments later, he was suddenly pulled underwater. An outline of a crocodile surfaced briefly before disappearing again, leaving nothing but ripples where the man had been. However, what made the footage even more disturbing was the context behind it. The day before, a boy named Arjuna was bathing near the water's edge when a crocodile dragged him under. Search teams spent the entire evening looking for him without success. The following morning, this local man arrived claiming he could help. He introduced himself as a crocodile shaman with supernatural powers to control the predators. The police warned him not to enter the water, as they knew he wasn't a real shaman, but he ignored them and walked into the river anyway. The next day, both bodies were recovered. Arjuna's body was found first in the early morning hours, and the shaman's body surfaced that evening floating between search boats. However, when the doctors examined the remains, they discovered that both bodies were completely intact. As a result, investigators concluded that the lack of oxygen took their lives as they were held underwater. Subsequently, the police closed off the riverbanks and posted guards to stop anyone else from entering. Level 5. Yellow Cloth Teas. A herd of elephants was calmly crossing a highway in Assam, India on July 25, 2021, but the crowd that gathered wouldn't let them pass peacefully. The footage shows a large crowd of tea garden workers and passerbys gathered on both sides of the road, and instead of letting the herd pass, they began taunting the animals. Multiple people waved yellow cloths at the elephants, while others honked their horns and shouted. One man in a purple shirt stepped forward, waving his yellow cloth directly at the passing herd. The elephants kept moving at first, trying to ignore the herd, but the non-stop honking, shouting, and waving became too much. One elephant suddenly broke away from the herd and charged straight at the crowd. Everyone scattered, running in different directions to escape, but as people fled, one man tripped and fell to the ground. Before he could get back up, the elephant reached him and began trampling upon him repeatedly. Apparently, these elephant crossings happen regularly in areas where forest corridors have been lost to human activity. The trampled man was rushed to Golaghat Civil Hospital after the trampling, but unfortunately, he lost his life from injuries that same evening. He was later identified as Pachkal Mura, a 45-year-old local resident who had been among those taunting the herd. One punch too many. Some actions have instant consequences, and at a children's holiday camp in Siberia, one man learned that the hard way. The footage shows a watchman walking toward a two-humped camel in the snow, and when he got close, he suddenly punched the camel without any reason whatsoever. However, the camel's response was immediate and violent. It lunged forward and clamped down repeatedly as it pulled him to the ground. Before he could recover, the camel began trampling him in the snow, using its full weight to crush him over and over. Also, we can't show the complete videos of these on YouTube, but you can always access the uncensored versions on our Patreon, if you dare. The incident occurred at the Beryozka Recreational Center in Omsk, Siberia, where the temperature that day was around -9 Celsius. The camel had been kept at the camp and was described as peaceful before the punch, but local reporters stated the animal did not appreciate such treatment. Now, following the incident, the man was rushed to a nearby hospital, but sadly, medical staff couldn't save him. He lost his life shortly after arrival from the combined injuries. Later, the victim was identified as a 51-year-old watchman named Yuri, who had been on duty that day. Ultimately, the footage went viral as a warning about animal retaliation. All for a photo. In May 2018, footage from Odisha, India captured just how far someone was willing to go for a photo. The footage showed the man on the ground being mauled by a sloth bear. The man remained conscious and struggled as the bear dragged him across the ground. Meanwhile, bystanders stood nearby, shouting and throwing objects at the animal, but the bear refused to let go. A stray dog even tried to help by biting at the bear, but the larger animal kept attacking. The mauling continued for several minutes, and no one was able to stop it in time. It turned out that the victim had been driving home from a wedding with friends when they spotted the bear drinking water. The man then decided that he wanted to take a photo with the animal. His friends had begged him to stay inside the car. However, he ignored their warnings because he wanted a once-in-a-lifetime selfie with the animal. Now, the bear was already injured, which should have made it even more dangerous to approach. But as he kept going and as he got closer, he slipped, and that was when the bear attacked. Now, eventually, forest officials arrived and had to tranquilize the bear before they could get to the man, but he had already lost his life when they got to him. The victim was later identified as Prabhu Bhattara, a local driver. As for the bear, the forest ranger confirmed that it was being treated for its own wounds. Level 6. Rocky's Rehearsal. It started as a promotional video shoot, but it quickly spiraled into something no one expected. The footage showed two men standing next to a massive grizzly bear on a sunny afternoon. They were attempting a wrestling stunt for the camera. However, the animal suddenly lunged forward and grabbed one of the men by the neck. The man went down hard as the bear's jaws clamped onto him, prompting the other handlers to rush in. They struck the bear with cane-sized sticks and sprayed pepper spray directly at its face, forcing it to release its grip. The trainer then scrambled out of the bear's hold. The attack happened at Predators in Action, an animal training compound near Big Bear Lake, on April 22, 2008. The bear was a 700-pound grizzly named Rocky who'd been raised from a cub. He'd done this exact routine countless times. In fact, he'd even performed in Hollywood films, but there was never an incident. Later, the facility's owner, Randy Miller, explained what went wrong. Apparently, Rocky's routine involved coming forward aggressively to grab the trainer's raised arms. But during this particular session, the bear initiated the move before the trainer was ready. His arms were down at his sides instead of raised, so Rocky grabbed his neck instead. Randy also added that he didn't blame Rocky for what happened, believing the bear hadn't meant to hurt him. The bite punctured the trainer's jugular vein, and as a result, he lost his life at the scene from blood loss. The trainer was later identified as 39-year-old Stephen Miller, Randy's cousin and an experienced animal handler. Ironically, 2 months before the attack, Stephen had told a newspaper, "If one of these animals gets hold of your throat, you're finished." Ultimately, the appropriate authorities launched investigations, but the death was eventually ruled accidental. As for Rocky, he was barred from contact with anyone except his trainers for the rest of his life. Dogs versus tusks. On the morning of November 24, 2024, an elderly woman stepped outside her home in rural China to investigate a strange noise. However, a massive wild boar with sharp tusks suddenly burst into her courtyard and charged directly at her. It slammed into the woman with enough force to knock her off the steps, and the beast didn't stop there, but instead began to bite and tear at her lower body with extreme aggression. The woman's 3 small pet dogs rushed in to save her, but they were too tiny to stop the animal. The boar continued to toss the woman across the dirt while blood began to pool on the stones. It continued for a while before eventually stopping and walking away. A neighbor heard the screams and ran over, but he initially thought the woman had simply fallen. He only realized the true horror when he saw the massive wounds and the wild animal tracks leading away from the house. Emergency workers arrived and tried to restart the woman's heart, but the blood loss was too severe for her to survive. Investigators later identified the victim as 76-year-old Hu Sukui. They found deep tusk marks in her lower back and confirmed that her lower body was completely destroyed by the attack. Later investigations revealed that a group of 4 men had gone into the mountains that morning to hunt, and their hunting dogs cornered one boar which fled into the residential area and ultimately entered Hu's yard. The authorities took the 4 hunters in for questioning, and the local government mediated a settlement with the victim's daughter. Ultimately, the county began new patrols to track the boar population, but the animal responsible was never caught. Level 7. The final performance. December 2016. Upbeat dance music filled the air as families watched a lion tamer lead 3 massive lions through a routine. The man stood in the center of the enclosure and waved a stick to signal the big cats. One lion began to climb a ladder while the man focused on another predator across the cage. However, the third lion suddenly reared up on its hind legs and lunged from behind. The 400-pound beast pounced on the trainer's back and pinned him to the ground. The trainer immediately lost consciousness while the animal continued its relentless assault. 2 other staff members desperately rushed into the enclosure to save their colleague. They used long sticks to poke the lion, forcing it to release its grip on the man's throat. Medical teams rushed into the cage and found the man had catastrophic injuries. He was taken to a nearby hospital for emergency surgery, and for several days he fought for his life in the hospital, but his injuries were too severe, and he ultimately passed away. Later, authorities identified the victim as 35-year-old Islam Shaheen. He was a veteran trainer with 10 years of experience at the lion village in Egypt. The animal that attacked him was a male lion recently brought over from South Africa. Investigators learned that the lion had been acting erratically because it was mating season. Also, the trainer's friends claimed the animal might have been hungry or startled by the loud music. Either way, the lion was immediately pulled from all future shows and placed in a separate cage. Ultimately, the circus was temporarily shut down while the investigation continued. A free ticket. Thousands of families were enjoying a sunny afternoon at the zoo when a sudden scream cut through the air. A man in a blue parka lay on the ground inside the Tiger Hill enclosure as a massive predator gnawed his neck. 2 other tigers began circling while the primary tiger continued mauling him. Immediately, the zoo staff began throwing firecrackers to scare the tiger off. And it worked for a while as the primary tiger ran off, but it soon came back and continued the attack. This time, it refused to let go. This rescue operation lasted for an entire hour while the victim remained trapped in the jaws of the animal. Eventually, the police arrived with a special forces unit to end the standoff. The man was rushed to a nearby hospital, but the damage to his neck and head was too severe. Doctors pronounced him dead a few hours later. Investigations revealed that the man was a 40-year-old visitor named Zhang. He had been visiting the zoo with his wife, 2 children, and a colleague named Li along with Li's wife. The women and children had bought tickets and entered normally, but Zhang didn't want to pay the 130 yuan entrance fee, so he and Li decided to scale the zoo's outer walls to sneak in for free. Zhang jumped down into the enclosure, but Li saw the tigers and backed off just in time. The aftermath of the attack sparked a massive debate online. Zhang's family blamed the zoo for having walls that were too easy to climb. They claimed that the facility should be responsible for at least half of the damages, describing Zhang as an underprivileged employee. However, many people felt more sympathy for the animal than for the man who broke the rules. As a result, the zoo closed its doors for several days to review its safety protocols. Now, animals can be dangerous, but tragedies involving people cross all limits. Think you've seen it all? Well, let's test that in the most disturbing incidents caught on camera, Iceberg. Oh, and just so you know, this video has an exclusive uncensored level 8, which you can find on our Patreon. Link in the description. And maybe we'll post a picture of my dog who's just off camera.